Hello, Ocho Libre here, and welcome to Cy Twombly Part 1. Recently was lucky enough to go to LA and see not one, but two exhibits on Cy Twombly. The second one is at the Gagosian Gallery in Beverly Hills. Look for a separate video on my channel here, Cy Twombly Part 2, to see that one, which was equally good. But this one is the Getty. And if you've never been to the Getty in Los Angeles, it is an amazing place. I remember when it was built, I think it was in the 90s. I mean, literally it's the entire top of the mountain. And this is the tramway that you have to take. It's, I don't know, 3/4 of a mile just to get from the parking area on up to the main museum. But you could spend easily an entire day just looking at the buildings and the gardens without even going inside the gallery. There's so much to see, and it's such an incredible space. Having spent so many years as an architect and builder of custom homes, I can't get by without talking a little bit about the building and the grounds. Here you can see my foot used for scale. That's just simply an edging piece for the landscape, for the edge of, usually used around grass. But here you can see the decomposed granite, and that steel is probably an inch thick. It's everywhere. Here you can see a cool model of the museum, and as you enter the museum where the red arrow is for the main area, the Twombly Museum is up there on the second floor where that arrow is, which is where these pictures are taken from. As you can see, the entire museum is covered in limestone, and it's worth talking about that for a second. Richard Meyer, the since disgraced for sexual harassment architect, was quite famous and was known for his white modernist buildings. But apparently they told him he couldn't do white, so he did off-white. And what you can see here is this is simply the walkway up to the museum, and you can see how the limestone is cut on 4 sides and then has a natural finish on the other side. There is no grout like you would see in a brick wall, so it's either hung or it's mortared behind there without any grout. Some places it's grouted, some places it isn't, but it's just fabulous workmanship and materials throughout the project. Okay, the Twombly exhibit. I'm no expert on Twombly. As a matter of fact, I really didn't know much about him at all. I've been fascinated with his paintings. They're a little challenging at times because there's a lot of scribbling going on, a lot of gestural stuff. But I did read this book, which I thought was so-so. I actually kind of thought it was a little obtuse, and that may have been the point of it. His life is difficult to figure out. He was different than a lot of the other peers of the 1950s abstract expressionism movement, particularly out of New York. He actually moved to Italy in the early 50s and spent most of his life there. But early on, let's see, he was born in 28, died in 2011 of cancer. He was buddies with Robert Rauschenberg and went to Rome with Rauschenberg and apparently had a romantic relationship with him. But by 1957, he was married to Tatiana Franchetti, an Italian heiress, and living in Rome. By 1964, he had met Nicola de Rossio, who became his lifelong friend and companion, although he stayed married to Tatiana and very friendly until his death. So the title of this exhibit is Cy Twombly Making Past Present, and it mainly has to do with his works early in the 50s, early 60s when he was in Rome. He apparently loved antiquities and collected all kinds of antiquities and used them in his painting and his sculptures. You'll see a lot of references to Greek and Roman gods and various words and symbols and so forth. And the book collection that they had at the beginning of the exhibit showed some interesting books, and particularly this one on mythology, which until I went through the exhibit I didn't really understand why it was there. Entering the exhibit, the first painting I saw is this one. Actually, it's two. It's called Plato, in parentheses, a painting in two parts, 1977. Oil paint on canvas, part 1, and graphite on paper, part 2. This two-part work, naming the Greek philosopher Plato and 3 of his canonical texts, sets up an intriguing opposition. On the right, a space of writing, reading, and intellectual abstraction. At the left, a space of painterly expression, color, and visual sensation. The contrast seems evident, but does Twombly propose some equivalence to? Is there a correlation between the atmospheric expanse of sky blue and the mental expanse of the reader-viewer, open to lofty philosophical ideas? So that's read from the plaque next to the painting in the museum, and I won't do this for all the paintings, but I thought it was a good way to start. Also notice the nails on the side of the canvas. Even though it's 1977, they're still nailing canvas on the side of the stretcher bars, which seems weird to me, instead of the back. In any case, I thought it was a cool painting, and it also gives you an idea of the depth of Twombly's work. This blue painting has underpainting, and you can see some faint words and so forth in it. But to think of the two parts of Plato and the blue sky and so forth, you know, although it looks simple, there's a lot to these paintings, and you could have hour-long discussions on each and every one of them. This next painting, actually 30 paintings, untitled 1970. It's oil paint, wax crayon, and graphite on paper. And this is sort of late 60s. Twombly developed his signature looping cursive style of painting that he's so well known for. And as you can see, there's a little stone tablature, ancient Roman ruin with some writing on it. And it said that, you know, maybe his interest in that Latin written work on stone that he probably couldn't decipher maybe led to his idea of doing this. I don't know. I guess it's a theory, but interesting. This painting is called Il Parnaso from 1964. Using oil paint, wax crayon, graphite, and colored pencil on canvas. I couldn't get a really good picture because of the reflection, but really interesting on the gray background, and it is apparently in reference to this Italian painting from the, 15th century? Parnassus. Okay, we're still in the first room, as you can see, the Il Parnaso on the left. And after I went through the entire exhibit, I went through it again with a guided docent, which was really great and very helpful. Even though they have a recorded thing you can listen to on your phone, the docent sheds a lot of light on the paintings and gave me a whole different point of view on things. But we have both Apollo and Venus here, and you can see the list of names in Apollo, and I won't even try to explain all the references between these two, but you know, is that art? I don't know. It kind of reminds me of Basquiat, and obviously Basquiat took a lot of reference from Twombly, but it looks more like scrawling handwriting, but it is extremely interesting. Moving into the second gallery, I was shocked to find a picture of myself with Cy Twombly. I think it was 1956, the year before I was born. Actually, that's a joke. It's a picture by Robert Rauschenberg when they first went to Rome, and they're at some ruin. The actual photo, which is pretty famous right now as well, taken by Rauschenberg, was in the next gallery, along with this big wall hanging photo of a magazine article. I think it was Look. It wasn't Life, but if you look through the doorway, you can see his wife Tatiana in the background. And he had all his paintings and his antiquities scattered about the apartment, and that was the way he lived. The article was kind of funny because it in some ways painted a picture of domestic bliss, which wasn't the real story behind Twombly, but that's the way it was presented. There were a number of Twombly's sculptures in the exhibit, which I don't know. I kind of wonder if he wasn't such a famous artist, if they would have made bronzes of these sculptures. But in any case, he assembled things out of pieces from the studio, and a lot of it was painted white and kind of scrappy. But again, his paintings are sort of that way too, so who am I to criticize? This painting is called Blue Ridge Mountains Transfixed by a Roman Piazza. And I'm going to read what's on the card next to it. 1962. Oil paint, wax crayon, and graphite on canvas. Twombly's title underscores his identification with locales that carried personal meaning. In this case, the hills of Virginia, where he was born, and the cityscape of Rome, where he resided when this work was made. Two scumbled, mountain-like forms flank a roughly abstracted city square, a rural and an urban landscape collapsed together, afloat on a blank canvas. I read a quote from Uber art dealer Larry Gagosian, and that's also where the second Twombly exhibit is, which you can find also on my channel. It's the part 2 of this, and actually equally as good in my opinion. In any case, he said something to the effect of, Twombly's an interesting painter. You look at him and you don't really know why you like the paintings, but you do. And I kind of feel the same way. At first glance they seem so overly simplistic and childlike, but when you get deeper into the layers, almost like the layers on his painting, there's more to it, and really fascinating. This painting is called Orpheus, and again from the museum information, it's 1979, oil-based house paint, stick paint, and wax crayon on canvas. So in the late 70s, Twombly returned often to the theme of Orpheus, poet and singer in Greek mythology. He admired the sonnets to Orpheus by Austrian poet Rainer Maria Rilke, which repeat and emphasize the O sound. Here the oversized O stands for Orpheus. But also next to it is this sculpture that he had collected. And it's interesting to note the expression of the sculpture. In the third gallery, we see a lot of big, colorful works. And these four, just briefly, their works are kind of collagey with on paper, and very sexualized. There are 4 or 5 of them in a similar sort of vein. But the ones that actually was the pair of aqua paintings and one other painting that really struck me. These two here are called Leaving Paphos Ringed with Waves number 3 and Leaving Paphos Ringed with Waves number 4. According to the docent, the orange shape is sort of like the boat with the oars that ancient Greeks may have used. And finally, this incredible painting called Leda and the Swan, 1962. The mythical princess Leda was raped by Zeus disguised as a swan, and all hell broke loose. This painting you weren't allowed to take a picture of, so that's a hidden iPhone picture that I took in the previous ones from their catalog. Anyway, again, you know, we could talk about this single painting for hours, but I thought it was just amazing. And finally, we move to the last gallery, and several of these paintings were similar until we get to the last big painting of the group, which is one of his chalkboard paintings, which is also another thing he's very well known for, kind of combining his cursive almost with like a school board chalkboard. And there are many painters who emulate this today, and I still think they're kind of cool. Sometimes they're darker charcoal like this one, sometimes they're more like the greenish type of chalkboard you might have seen, but you can see how it lends itself to the erasure of the painting and the painting over like a chalkboard. As a matter of fact, that book, the biography that I read, was called Chalk. Anyway, there's something really interesting to me about this painting. It's almost like there's some secret calculations or something on here. What do you think about it? So that's my report on the Twombly exhibit in the Getty. Check out the one in the Gagosian. I feel like I'm not really a terrific explainer of the Twombly art. It sort of baffles me, but like Larry Gagosian says, I'm also fascinated by it. In any case, a couple of photos to leave you with. Right near the Gagosian Gallery in Beverly Hills, I found this sculpture. It's called the Takeout Man, and I thought he was kind of cool. This is some guy running down the street with piles of takeout food on his head. Very LA. See you next time, and don't forget to check out Cy Twombly Part 2. Ocho Libre out.